Hi, it's Helen Tarrant. I want to talk to you today about leases. So about constructing the right lease with your tenant, about some of the important things you need to put into your leases. So let's go and look at some of the things that I would put into a lease or that I look for when I'm looking at a lease. So as we understand that in a commercial property, you have either a vacant property or a tenanted property. A vacant property is one without a tenant, without a lease. Now, you will need to have some good serviceability to be able to buy those properties. But if you decide to buy a property that has a tenant in it, which is your essential set and forget property that's going to give you cash flow from day one, then you're going to need to know, understand and know what a lease is. Now, a lease is what we would call in the commercial property realm, the Bible that governs how your property works and the relationship between you and the tenant. So it's really important to understand some of the key elements to it. So you don't have to read a lease from cover to cover, and often that's full of legal jargon that you probably wouldn't understand, and you probably feel that it's just too much for you right now. But you see, there's some key things that I always look at when I go through a lease, even if I don't read every single page of the lease. Now, your solicitor or someone who's helping you with due diligence should be able to review that lease, should be able to look at that lease for you and give you some comments about it. But in order that you know what you are buying, about going into their eyes wide open, it is about looking at leases and looking at the schedule in the lease. So the schedule of a lease is either at the front part of your lease, so it might be in the first 2 to 4 pages, or it might be at the back of your lease. Now, a schedule is usually about 10 to 12 items, and it covers all the essential parts of the lease, and it will also refer to important clauses in the lease. So that is the page that I look at the most. It would include who the lessor and the lessee is, and if you want to be extra diligent, it's worthwhile to actually go and do a company search on the lessee, so that you know that the lessee is registered, say for PAYG, they're registered for GST, and the company's still trading. It gives you a little bit of a history on the actual property itself and the tenant itself as well. So that's really, really important. Of course, look at the rent. Look at the rent review, meaning that the rent review on a yearly basis, whether it goes up by CPI or 3% or 4%. Look at when they have an option and when the option is due. So let's say that the option is due in 2 years' time. How long do they have to exercise the option? So is it they have to tell you 3 months in advance or 6 months in advance? Because that can help you to manage whether the tenant is going to stay on or not. Now, if the tenant is going to stay on, then that's fantastic, because then they simply just take up the option and they continue on with the lease. Now, if the tenant doesn't, it allows you to know how long you have to be able to market the property. Now, you should have a minimum of 3 months from the time your tenant chooses not to take up the option for you to market that property. And if you're really proactive during that time, meaning get onto the right agents, speak to the right people, put the right marketing in place, and make sure you get a nice market rent appraisal and go out there and start marketing, you should be able to get a tenant. Now, remember, the next stage and the next other videos I'll be making is talking about negotiating with tenants, but essentially when you need to be quite firm and quite active about this. So if the time comes when your tenant has decided they're not going to take up the option and you have a 3-month period to be able to market this property, you need to get on it straight away. So the moment, let's say 1st of March 2021, your tenant has said, has not given you a response to whether they want to take up the option. They've said, they don't know whether they will or not. I would start marketing the property straight away, because you want to give yourself the maximum amount of time. Now, your tenant can always change their mind in a month's time when you start marketing, and yes, you would have cost you a few $1,000s in terms of marketing the property. But the thing is, at the end of the day, all you have to do is at least give yourself the best chance to be able to really get a tenant. Because the thing is, you don't know if this tenant will change their mind in a month or whether they've decided that they will move out in 3 months' time. So you want to still go out there and start marketing for a tenant as soon as you can. Now, the other things I look at is in terms of outgoings. What does your tenant pay? Who pays for the outgoings? Now, in commercial property, you can get the tenants to pay all the outgoings. That means if you're in a freestanding building, that's the insurance, the actual the maintenance of the property. Say, if there's gardening and there's some maintenance of the property, and also rates, being council and water rates, as well as maybe property management. Now, if you have a strata property, you're going to find that the tenant can pay for the strata fees, the both either admin and sinking, or maybe sometimes just admin fees. And the reason for that is sinking fund is mostly around the capital works of the property, and therefore it's at the capital works of the property. It is often the owner's contribution to that as well, and you'll find that in a strata body corporate is 1/3, 2/3. So 1/3 capital works, or what we call sinking fund, and 2/3 admin. And your tenant obviously could pay for land tax as well, pay for property management, as well as insurance on the property. So there's many outgoings your tenants can pay for, but the main thing about this is that that you understand what exactly is what you pay for and what is it that your tenant pays for, so that if you choose to self-manage the property, you know what outgoings to pass on, or if you to help you work out what your positive cash flow is going forward. And also, not only about that, is about whether it's going to fluctuate into the future. So if you have a set fee that is controllable, so for example, you have more control in insurance. Obviously, insurance will go up each year, but you can always, increase the excess, reduce the premium. You can always shop around for different insurance agencies, so all different policies, and you can obviously add or subtract out of the policy as well, depending on what you need as in the whole time you have the property. Or if you have strata, then you have slightly less control, but you can look at the historics of it, seeing in the last 2 or 3 years where there's been a massive rise in terms of having the sinking fund or the admin fund. So those things are going to help you to monitor costs in the future, because it is about monitoring those costs in the future as well. So understanding your outgoings. Now in the outgoings, it should, in the section on the items in the schedule, it should say 100% or 50% or nil, but you would also find a corresponding clause either in the definition section of the contract, or you'll find a heading, sorry, not the contract, the lease, or you'll find a heading in the lease as well. And that's the most important thing. I look at what it includes in the list and the definition for it, because it's important to make sure that everything is covered during that process. The next step really is to look for unusual clauses. So I look at any default clauses, any break lease clauses that's actually in the lease. That's the main thing, because you want to make sure that your tenant is actually locked into that. And the one other thing I look at is the deposit, or the bond as we call it. So is the tenant giving you a bank guarantee, or is it a cash bond? Because it's important to know that upon settlement, that bond or the rental guarantee or the bank guarantee will be passed on to you. So this way, then you know you've got that security. Should your tenant get up and leave, or should they break lease, or for whatever reason, then you have an extra 3 or 6 months, so that you have that security to allow you to market the property and then tenant the property as well. Now, one of the most important things to remember about leases is that if you have a vacant property and you put a new tenant in there, you as the owner has total flexibility and total control over how to negotiate that lease and all the clauses in that lease. But if you are buying a property that is set and forget, then you have to take the lease as is. That means you don't get to control the lease. You don't get to say, hey, I don't like these clauses. Can you change it? Can you do that? No, you take the lease as it is. If you don't like it, then this property is not right for you. But you can always change the lease later on through negotiations with your tenant after you are the owner of the property. Now, of course, if you want to change any clauses in the lease, you have to negotiate with the tenant and make sure it's equitable for the tenant and that there's something worth it for the tenant. So if you want them to increase their bond because you're feeling that, in case of volatility in the market, you want them to increase the bond so you've got more security, well, you may have to offset that by giving them a month rent free or something. So it's all about give and takes in a lease negotiation. So just remember that when you get started. But have a look at your lease, tune into some other videos, make sure you subscribe. I'm going to do some more videos on leases and the different types of leases and what you should be looking for in them in the upcoming videos. So bye for now.